Hi folks, Simon here, welcome back to the channel. Now, I know that many of you are perhaps most familiar with my Final Fantasy content, but some of the other games that I've played quite intensively over the last few years whilst doing YouTube have been the Ni No Kuni games. And Ni No Kuni 1 in particular is, in my opinion, one of the best Japanese role-playing games that I've played, at least over the last few years. So this news today is, kind of sad to me, but it's definitely relevant regardless. And that is that Level 5, that is the company behind the Ni No Kuni franchise, amongst other games as well, such as the Yoki Watch series and the Professor Layton franchise, that Level 5 are going to be, and have in fact been, closing down their operations here in the West. Their American offices have been closing, they've been laying off their staff, and they've been doing this, it seems, fairly quietly behind the scenes. So this isn't official news, it's coming from sources that games industry have spoken to. But what this is going to mean, according to these sources, is that any future releases of their games in the West, here in Europe, in America, etc., are going to be shelved. And this is relevant, I think, especially because Ni No Kuni 3 is announced to be in development, but it's very likely now that Ni No Kuni 3 is not going to be getting a Western release. Okay, so we're just going to briefly go over the article here by Rebecca Valentine, and I will leave a link to it in the video description if you want to read it more thoroughly. But she tells us that Ni No Kuni and Yoki Watch developer Level 5 appear to have all but shuttered their North American operations, and according to multiple sources, Level 5 began winding down operations in the middle of last year, part of which included laying off the majority of their staff. Right, so, especially in today's context, when we hear about layoffs and the closing down of operations, we immediately assume, oh no, another victim of COVID. But no, not in this case. This began in the middle of last year, really before COVID started to have an impact on business as we're seeing today. So, it's always sad, definitely, when people lose their jobs, though, regardless of the reason, especially when it's en masse. And we don't know exactly how many employees have been laid off from the American offices, but it sounds like the majority of them for sure. They're now running just a skeleton crew, just for various, important tasks and stuff that they still need to go ahead with. But this is going to have a big impact for their games, especially in terms of how they're going to be released, or if they're going to be released over here in Western regions. And according to these same sources, Rebecca Valentine tells us that they're probably not going to be releasing any further games here in the West, which is, of course, a bit of a blow, especially to those of us that have enjoyed, various games from them. In my case, the Ni No Kuni games. I was very much looking forward to Ni No Kuni 3, although I had noticed that the announcement for that game was kind of odd. It was more like just mentioned in an interview that they're working on this, they're developing this game, and they never really gave any further information about that. Now, that game is still very much in development, but it is clearly, at this point, only going to be released in Japan, and those of us here in the West will probably not get to play it. But Rebecca also makes a good point here. For those of you that have been, a little bit more invested in the Level 5 games than even I have, you may have noticed that things have just slowed down quite a bit over the last couple of years or so. The game releases have slowed down, even the company's social media presence has slowed down with only one post in the last 2 years, which you've got to admit is pretty unusual for a company nowadays that, is really trying to market their stuff. Social media is, one of the main ways of doing that. So perhaps in some respects this isn't the most surprising news, but of course it's still sad, and I will be sad if we don't get to play Ni No Kuni 3, and it's certainly now looking to be the case that we're not going to be able to do that unless we get a Japanese import, and seeing as how I can't understand Japanese for the life of me, that's not really going to be a viable alternative. But there we have it then, folks. What are your thoughts on this? Are you disappointed to not be getting any more Level 5 games over here in the West? And what do you think, might have caused this decision here to close down their international operations? I know we can only speculate on that, but I honestly have no idea. But there we have it then, folks. So not the happiest news today, of course, especially for those who have been laid off and affected by these, structural changes to the company. But of course, also for those of us that were looking forward to some of these upcoming releases. But it is what it is. There we have it. All right, folks. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.